Hey folks, coming up on Roland Martin Unfiltered, broadcasting live from Las Vegas, Nevada on this Friday, April 19th, 2019. Attorney General Barr, he clears Donald Trump of obstruction of justice. It must be nice to have white man privilege. We'll break it down, of course, with our all-star panel today. In the state of North Carolina, ground zero for voter suppression, members of Congress hold a hearing about the issue of voter suppression, and Reverend Dr. William Barber was one of the folks who testified today. We have some of his testimony. Also on today's show, a new poll talks about the power of black women, but they are very concerned about the future of America. We'll show you those poll results. Also, this dumbass, crazy-ass white man literally wants Howard University to move because he wants to be able to walk his dog and it should be a dog park. You have lost your damn mind. Wait until I show you what this colonizer has to say. All right, folks, also tomorrow is April 20th, and that is Cannabis Day in Washington, D.C. Big cannabis festival happening here. We'll talk with the founder of the festival about the legalization and the opportunities for African Americans when it comes to the issue of cannabis. Also, folks, a stunning video. Police in Connecticut shoot an unarmed, innocent young black woman, fired 12 shots into her car. She's still hospitalized. We'll tell you exactly what took place. And also, Laura Ingraham, why does she keep sitting here messing with people? And Christy Teigen does not play. She called her a white supremacist. Y'all, we got all that for you. It's a jam-packed show. I can't wait to bring the funk on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Let's go.
He's got it. Whatever the miss, he's on it. Whatever it is, he's got the scoop, the fact, the fine. And when it breaks, he's right on time and it's rolling. Best believe he's knowing. Putting it down from sports to news to politics. With entertainment just for kicks, he's rolling. It's on go, y'all. It's Roland Martin, rolling with Roland now. He's funk, he's fresh, he's real, the best, you know he's Roland Martin now.
All right, folks, we have seen the Mueller report that basically lays out obstruction of justice by Donald Trump. But his Attorney General, William Barr, says, no, there was no obstruction of justice. I made the decision. I didn't see any. Roll the tape.
There is substantial evidence to show that the president was frustrated and angered by his sincere belief that the investigation was undermining his presidency, propelled by his political opponents, and fueled by illegal leaks.
Really? The white man was frustrated. Eli Honig, a former federal prosecutor, says that's BS.
Was any person other than the President of the United States, I can say as a former prosecutor, this will be a knockdown case for obstruction of justice. I've charged and convicted people on obstruction of justice based on a fraction of this evidence.
Absolutely amazing. Now, activist Samuel Sing-Youngway wrote this tweet. Y'all love this one here. Pull the tweet up. AG Barr literally wrote a report called The Case for More Incarceration, where he said putting more black men in prison would, quote, benefit society. Now he's saying a white man can't be charged with felony obstruction of justice because his feelings were hurt. Well, let's get into our feelings with our panel. Teresa Lundy, she is the founder of TML Communications. Malik Boyd is a CEO of Deshuri Products. And Davon Love is Director of Public Policy, Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle there in Baltimore. Malik, I got to start with you. Really? His feelings were hurt? So sad.
So that was one of the lamest excuses I've ever heard, but it's clearly evident to us that the system, and if there's anybody that denies this, this is a classic example of a system that has benefited white privilege and still continues to this day. If a black man, if President Obama would have ever said something like that, the country would have fallen apart. And so the question for African Americans is, how long do we continue to let this kind of stuff go? When do we become connected with an agenda that ensures that we can address some of this stuff with the individuals that we put in office?
Well, and Teresa, what really gets me again is his hurt feelings, but I also find it still unbelievable with this whole notion that they are operating by a Department of Justice memo that the President of the United States cannot be indicted. I'm sorry. A federal judge hasn't ruled on that. The Supreme Court hasn't ruled on that. And I thought no one is above the law in the United States. Even if you commit a felony as a president, you should be able to be indicted if you did something or I did something. In fact, it's so crazy that we're actually saying that anybody in the federal government, all the way up to the vice president, can be indicted, but the one person who can't, that's nonsense.
Absolutely. And I think everybody needs to take an educational lesson on the Constitution and how our judicial system actually works. Because when you're a natural born citizen here in the United States of America, one of those freedoms, yes, is freedom of speech. But the other one is if you are committing a crime, you are punished to the fullest extent of the law. And so, you know, when I heard that, I was a bit baffled because what makes the president, outside of being who he is, you know, a leader of the free world, but not someone who should be exempt from it. So we have to really start looking at what we're saying to the public, what's real and what's fake, and really start to understand the basis and the notions of where that's coming from. Because if we keep pushing that type of blasphemy out there, we will probably be in a worse state than we are now in terms of finding the truth and delivering justice when needed.
Well, and in fact, Davon, I want to go to you next, and I want to tie in the story out of Baltimore with this very discussion. The cops who killed Freddie Gray, those cops, none of them went to jail, not a single one. Yet the black men who set a car on fire, they're going to jail for several years. And if I compare that case in Baltimore to what we're seeing with this notion of Donald Trump, and this is not just Donald Trump. That memo could have applied to President Barack Obama, could have applied to President Bill Clinton. And so you had this memo that was written, but still, I find it unbelievable because that you can say that, well, because the president is so busy, they can't be indicted. No, if you do wrong, you should be indicted. And the vice president, cabinet members, generals, all these folks, they can be indicted and not him. And what Donald Trump did, and his whole idea that, oh, well, you know, his people didn't follow through on his orders. Donald Trump tried to obstruct justice. It is undeniable. And you have two systems for those in power, those who are not. Those guys in Baltimore are going to prison for several years, and those cops who killed Freddie Gray are still walking around getting paid, Davon.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there's tremendous amounts of cynicism in the general public about whether or not we actually have a system that's fair. Now, many of us have known for years the criminal justice system is a system that protects those with power and money. And so what we see with the president is that he is able to use all manner of legal machinations in order to protect himself and his interests in ways that folks that aren't president of the United States, folks that have significantly less power and influence, have at their disposal. And so I think it's important for us to think about what message, you know, beyond just the politics of it, because I think the other panelists, you have done a good job of you know, talking about the politics of it in terms of federal government politics. But I think it's also important to think about what message does this send, right, to the average American citizen about the nature of the criminal justice system. And what this does is just it furthers the idea that has been growing, I would say, over the past few years, given all, the uprisings, the issues around police brutality becoming more mainstream. What this story does is that it gives credence to the fact that we live in a society based on racism and white supremacy, and that those that hold that kind of power are able to protect themselves from the state in ways that disproportionately undermine the humanity of people of African descent, people of color.
Well, and the thing that also I find to be real interesting when you look at how Donald Trump operates. Don McGahn was the White House lawyer who's the White House general counsel. When he went before Bob Mueller, Malik, was instructed to tell the truth. He could have been prosecuted for perjury if he lied. If you want to see how this Trump White House operates, Don McGahn went to work for a law firm after he left the White House. The Trump campaign, they're penalizing his law firm. There's a story on Politico right now where one Trump advisor said, why in the world would you want to put your enemy on the payroll? They literally are penalizing him because not only would he not lie for Trump when he was ordered to, he wouldn't lie to Bob Mueller, and Trump and his people are upset because he wouldn't keep lying for him.
It's interesting because you tied in the Baltimore case with Freddie Gray. And I think we can tie it up really simple. The badge, the robe, or the elected office, the burden of being in those spaces does not supersede the burden that justice has to be spread out equally and equitably. But time and time again, it's being proven that the system does not work for those who do not have the resources or have darker hue of skin. And we're now seeing a boldened use of this system. And I think Trump is doing well to teach America a lesson for those who have declared that this does not exist. We're looking at it live on center stage.
Teresa, Steny Hoyer, the number 2 for Democrats in the House, he said that, we really should not be pursuing impeachment. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she said she is going to sign on to Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib's petition calling for impeachment. Now you have Senator Elizabeth Warren. She says Congress should launch impeachment proceedings against Donald Trump. I don't understand why Democrats right now are running scared. You cannot convince me. There is no way you could convince me that if this was a president named Barack Hussein Obama, even if the Republicans only control one chamber, there is no doubt in my mind that they will be clamoring for impeachment proceedings if this report happened under President Obama.
A lot of things has happened since the 2016 election, and it looks like the only courage that is happening from the Democratic Party is from the younger membership outside of Elizabeth Warren, who's running for presidency, who's going with the talking points. But I think what we really need to start to understand that when we start saying, let's impeach the president, we also need to make sure that, it's a firm impeachment with some sustainable value to it. So, yes, if it was Barack Obama, I do believe everybody, on the Republican side would just be raising their hand without getting the facts. But, of course, since we are dealing with our America, which is right now, that we are also seeing, pretty much those negative connotations of what happens and how they're weighing against their own elections, because people don't know if Trump is going to win in the next cycle. So I think everybody right now is playing the cautious card, and hopefully, they'll make the right decision if impeachment is the right thing to do for this president.
But Davon, what this is about is the rule of law. And again, this is not a question of Democrat or Republican, red or blue, liberal or conservative. This president, undeniably, the information is clear. This man tried to obstruct the investigation into him. And he said yesterday, I could have fired Mueller if I wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, there's a level of, absolute power that I think has really colored the way in which the Trump administration has operated. And so, to your point, I mean, would make sense for Democrats to use every instrument at their disposal to check the president in terms of the way in which he's trying to wield power. I think, though, and this may be kind of an unpopular, perspective, but it's interesting in terms of the Democrats' unwillingness to, proceed with impeachment proceedings, because if you think about the United States history in interfering with elections around the world, and it continues to do so, its history of undermining elections around the world. And I imagine that there's some things that have to be reconciled if the Democrats and if the Congress in general is going to, proceed against the president in terms of impeachment, particularly relating to foreign involvement, of Russian involvement in our elections. It really calls into question, what is the real nature of the value of democracy, not just when it benefits us, but the value of democracy as a principle. And so I do think on principle, I think the Democrats have a responsibility to proceed with impeachment proceedings. But I think a much larger question, which is, as in the United States, as Americans, there needs to be a standard set that the United States does not do what it's alleging of what Russia has done to the United States elections in 2016. We have to make sure that we're just as strong as making sure that the U.S., through its intelligence agencies, aren't carrying out those same kinds of activities around the world.
And Malik, I want to go to that point before I go to my next story. Here you now have Senator Scott of Florida now wanting information from the Department of Justice about Russia tampering with the election there in Florida. They, according to the Mueller report, they accessed data in Illinois and Florida. They laid out clear, undeniable evidence of Russia trying to help Donald Trump and help Bernie Sanders because they hated Hillary Clinton. You had Putin sending his oligarchs to America to establish ties with Donald Trump and his administration so they could lift those sanctions. And Donald Trump did exactly what Putin wanted by not following through with those sanctions. What you have here is an administration with deep ties to Russia. He's doing the bidding of Putin. And Republicans, why in the world are they not demanding that this administration do more to protect our election? There is no doubt Russia will try to do in 2020 exactly what they did in 2016.
Well, Roland, I think my fellow panelists brought this out, and we just got to call a spade a spade. America has been involved in other countries' elections for years, hundreds of years, and we continue to do that same thing. And so, one, the Republicans aren't going to say anything. And to your point, it's not a Republican or a Democrat thing. It's government and what we have consistently done, not only on our own soil, but across the waters. I mean, yes, 1,600 and national elections look a little bit crazy, but try a local election in Philadelphia or Chicago and see what kind of tactics are used on a daily basis. So either we're going to drain the swamp and everyone in it that's been involved and create a new system, or things are just going to continue to do what they do right now. We create smoke screens, fake like we're angry, and wait for the next election cycle.
All right, folks, let's talk about, again, when you talk about democracy and how important this is, let's go to North Carolina, where Congresswoman Marcia Fudge of Ohio held a hearing there dealing with Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. We have detailed on this show for years what North Carolina Republicans there have been doing. They have been desperate to actually suppress the black vote. In 2008, massive turnout led to Barack Obama winning North Carolina by 14,100 votes. They had a dramatic increase in voter turnout as a result of the reforms put in place. Republicans said, oh, hell to the no. What did they do? Got rid of allowing 17-year-olds to be able to register to vote in time to vote in the next election. They got rid of citizenship training. They actually cut early voting, slashed it because they were targeting when black folks voted. And so the hearing was to talk about what Republicans have done there and why it's important to have oversight from the Department of Justice as a result of fixing the Shelby v. Holder decision that was brought down by the Supreme Court in 2012 that greatly has led to massive voter suppression led by Republicans. Here is Reverend Dr. William Barber, Repairers of the Breach, National Board Member of the NAACP, a preacher there in North Carolina, testifying about the impact of Republican-led voter suppression.
Reverend Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I think we should fully restore and expand the Voting Rights Act. Looking at the dynamics today, 40% of the population in the South is now people of color, and we should fully expand it. I think that we have to be very careful when I hear people wanting to make this about partisanism and keeping it where it is about race. Ultimately, voter suppression is racist voter suppression. That has always been, and that's what we continue to see. The court said here in North Carolina it was with surgical precision regarding race. I think we also, and I'd like to submit some additional things, but also issues like automatic voter registration at 18. If you can be registered for war at 18, automatically you should be registered to vote automatically at 18 to expand the vote. We should be looking at ways we can expand and more institutionalize early voting. All of those things that allow more participation. I'm haunted by that question the federal judge asked. Why is it that people don't want people to vote? And I would hope you would pull that from that federal, he asked it in court, it's in the record. Lastly, and I don't know how we deal with this, but beyond just restricting the right to vote, what we have had in North Carolina and in other places is an unconstitutionally constituted legislature then blocking the people of North Carolina from benefits like Medicaid expansion, like living wages. And then an unconstitutionally constituted legislature, once they lose in the federal court and lose in the state court, turn around and put things in the Constitution. And somewhere that is very troubling, that you can be elected by procedures that the courts say is unconstitutional, but use your unconstitutional ill-gotten power to then implement policies that affect people from their voting rights to their wages, to how we address poverty, to women's rights, to immigrants' rights. That is, if it's not wrong legally, it's certainly wrong morally, and I believe it is a fundamental undermining of democracy for those who have been unconstitutionally elected to then have the power to affect the lives of the people in every aspect and form of their daily lives.
Davon, we know for a fact that Republicans believe in voter suppression. We know what has happened in North Carolina, what has happened in Mississippi, what has happened in Alabama, what has happened in Florida, what has happened in Texas, what is happening in Tennessee, where they're trying to criminalize folks who are registering those to vote. We know exactly what happened in 2016 with voter suppression in Wisconsin, where even the voter ID bill that was approved there by federal judges, they were foot dragging, where a federal judge had to call in Governor Scott Walker to the court and say, why is your office dragging their feet on issuing voter IDs? Donald Trump won Wisconsin because of voter suppression there as well. And I dare say, Davon, in 2020, Republicans are going to do their best to suppress the vote again because they did not like that black turnout for Obama in 2008 and 2012.
Yeah, I mean, I think important context that I'm sure many of your viewers are familiar with. You know, after the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Dr. Martin Luther King started working on the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And, you know, what isn't publicized enough is that a part of the rationale for pursuing the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was because it was important to Dr. King that if we were serious about dealing with discrimination, beyond just protesting, that there were a tremendous amount of counties and municipalities in the South that were majority black in population, but didn't have the political power to govern those municipalities. And so, you know, the gutting of the Voting Rights Act was a gutting of black political power, right? Because the Voting Rights Act is an instrument of black political power. And of course, we all know that Democrats are heavily reliant on the black vote. And so Republicans understand from their political vantage point that undermining black political power is something that is to their advantage. And so all the things you just mentioned in terms of the lengths that the Republicans in North Carolina and around the country have gone to engage in voter suppression is something that, as black people, it's really important that we understand that curtailing our black political power, right, curtailing our access to the ballot box, is curtailing one particular important mechanism among many that's going to be important for empowering our communities and using the power that we do have to have leverage over the Democratic Party in order to get the interests that we need as a community. And so we need to have the vote available to us. And so it's important for us to continue to speak out against voter suppression because, again, it's a direct attack against the development of black political power.
And look, Malik, the reality is Republicans can continue to run around and try to say, oh, we're not doing this. This is all about voter fraud or election fraud. But that's nonsense. This is an undeniable attempt to target black voters. And for Chief Justice Roberts to say, well, look at the black turnout, that means this is no longer needed. No, the black turnout got so high that because of Section 5 and 1965 Voting Rights Act.
Relationships with black people, period. You're not going to find Republican efforts, especially in urban cities like Philadelphia, where they're sending any kind of real resources to the community to have real relationships. So the only way to block those ward leaders and committee people who galvanize votes in midterms, in primaries and generals, is to make sure that there are laws that impede that voting bloc to get to the table. Look, North Carolina still has a law on the books that's not enforceable, I believe, but it's around a literacy test. And so, I mean, they're very deliberate about what they're going to do. They're going to continue to do it until we stop it. But here's the other piece. African Americans have to get serious about voting. We can't have 17% turnout in major municipal elections like in Philadelphia and declare victories. We have to ensure that we're turning our people out and that they understand that the vote is an expression of our freedom of speech and it is an economic choice every time we choose to vote or not.
And look, Teresa, it's very simple. I keep telling people, don't think for a second that Donald Trump and his imps are not going to go after black voters with voter suppression and young voters. And so all y'all white folks out there, you young voters, they targeting you as well, older voters as well. Republicans need to keep turnout low in order to ensure their victory because they want to turn out as many as white folks as possible.
Absolutely, and it's real evident here in Pennsylvania. So there's 67 counties here in Pennsylvania, and the Republicans obviously are cheerfully with the results that happened in 2016. But because now we are a purple state, those efforts have started earlier than what was actually seen before. So what do I mean by that? So that means there are local grassroots organizations that have just sprouted up out of the blue that don't say necessarily Republican, but says conservative values. And those are touch points that are hitting into our universities, our 11th and 12th grade high school students. And then we have some candidates that have been running statewide that have been reaching out to some of the African-American majority and seeing if they can help them with the local elections. So, yes, they are pulling out all the stops to make sure that they secure their base for 2020. I think I looked at a report earlier about Donald Trump and his fundraising efforts. It looks like he was a little bit low. And Republicans are trying to figure out what to do because if the Democrats, obviously if we have the popular vote, and then, we amount that with some urgency with some other votes, then, it's not going to look good for his reelection. But I think, again, we just need to be mindful and use our voices to the fullest extent, utilizing the organizations and our resources to better suit what's about to happen in the future.
And let's talk about this election. Of course, there's a new poll out that breaks down how black women feel. It was conducted by SDK Knickerbocker. The poll was conducted for 3 groups focusing on women's reproductive rights. Now, this is what they found from black women. The chart on feelings about the direction of the country. The reddish colors to the left stands for angry, disgusted, scared, sad, nervous. Those negative attitudes total 78%. One reason why, when asked if they agree with the statement, if we go down the same path, I do not think the U.S. will be a safe place for black women, 85% agreed. But black women are doing something about that. 91% of the black voters polled agree with the statement. I voted in the most recent election because I felt like the stakes were too high not to. Is there any group who votes at a higher rate? I don't think so. Black women want to be seen for what they are. Here's the deal. 93% agreed elected officials need to understand that there are differences in the black community and not everyone thinks the same. Different from white women. Quote, as a woman of color, I want my elected officials to understand how my experience and my needs differ from their white women constituents. 89% agreement. Okay, one more. Black women were both more engaged in voting than their Latina and Asian counterparts, but also more worried about the future. And two major things there. And I want to pull this story here. I was looking on Politico about the effort that Senator Elizabeth Warren is making towards black voters. And I'm going to go to Teresa, then Davon. So, Teresa, Elizabeth Warren is getting a lot of attention from black activists for her very specific policies dealing with the issue of racial inequality. And so, look, if you're a candidate, you better be speaking specifically to what black women want to hear, and I dare say what black men want to hear as well, because there was a 6-point gap, a 9-point gap between black women and black men for Democrats, not only in 2016 with Trump, but also in 2012 between Obama and Romney. Teresa, you're first, then Davon.
Yeah, so black women are obviously making their plea once again to those who are running to get our vote. As the studies and the polls have been showing that, yes, some of those disparities, the equal pay wage, the gap within that, some racial disparities, the women in prison and the dignity that happens within that. So most of these criminal justice issues that need to be reformed should be reformed. But I think some of the issues that we are having in terms of kind of getting that word out is really just kind of talking points. So for me personally, I'm not seeing any candidate outside of, especially the ones that have experience and, are sitting in the Senate, are really, expressing what they have done legislatively in their past about, dealing with those African-American issues. But yet they want to get on the campaign trail and say something different because they are running. So for me, I'm high hopes for those who want to do something. But again, I'm looking for a little bit more than lip service.
Yeah,
Davon,
I think,
when you look at this in terms of how black women feel, candidates better be smart speaking to those issues. But I do want to ask you, though, this poll is dealing with black women. I have been saying the last several years that Democrats better really pay attention. I get black girl magic. I get into targeting black women. But there's an issue there. There's a gap there between black men and black women voting for Democratic candidates. And black men are saying, I want to hear you speaking to me as a black man as well. Davon, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, so a few things. I think the first is that there's a history of black women really serving as the backbone in terms of the political organization amongst black folks throughout our sojourn here in the United States. So you think about like the Montgomery Improvement Association, you think of someone like Joanne Robinson, who kind of was the operator of the machine that was the Montgomery Improvement Association that was, involved in the organizing that dealt with segregation down there. And so, there's history all over the United States like that, where you have, colored women's clubs, that were big parts of creating political organization. And many of the remnants of those political machines exist today. And so I think the data from the report that we're referencing just shows really the remnants of the political organizing that was really the bedrock of that. Now, to your point about the gap between black women and black men in terms of voting, I do believe if we really look at mass incarceration, and the war on drugs. And we look at the particular impact it had on the social fabric of the Black community. If you think about the way in which Black men were essentially ripped from many of their families as a result of the policy of the war on drugs, it goes to show that there's certain kinds of issues that wouldn't get talked about or wouldn't get included in the mainstream of the Democratic Party because, unfortunately, a lot of Black men have been, marginalized in this society in a particular kind of way. Not to say that Black women aren't marginalized, but to say there's a particular kind of way that Black men are marginalized that I think has undermined the real nature of our participation. And so I think one of the things that we need to be doing as Black folks in our relationship to the Democratic Party is demanding that they speak to more issues that impact a broader swath of our community. The reason we see such low voter turnout, particularly in urban cities where you have 10% of the electorate turning out, is because the Democratic Party establishment has not really backed candidates that really talk about some of the things that we're actually getting to now. So now we're talking about police brutality, we're talking about mass incarceration and racial inequality, but all that has happened under the backdrop of major uprisings and protests and challenges to the Democratic Party establishment. And so now we have this runway to talk about issues that otherwise haven't been talked about. And so using the machinery that Black women have laid the groundwork for politically, and then infusing more issues that impact broader swaths of our community, I think is the way forward.
Malik, again, I think that if you look at this polling data, when you hear what Black women are saying, they're very concerned about the future. I think that is very much about Trump, his appeal to white nationalism and this whole white fear that is driving so much of the conversation today.
Yeah, and so Davon brought up a good analogy. He talked about clearing the way through the protest and some of the upheaval to ensure that there's a runway for these candidates. But I would caution us not just to clear the runway, but to check the flight plan, because we're electing these officers and sending them on and in the sky, and then they're changing the flight plan. And so we get a lot of talk, a lot of what we would just call rhetoric in the space. 84% of Black women said too often the candidates running for office do not acknowledge their issues and what matters to them the most. And then you saw the Democratic Party come behind it with a seat at the table. Well, that's great. It sounds good, but it left many wondering, where is that table? Is it outside of the boardroom? Is it in the kitchen? Is it in the lunchroom? But it's certainly not at a true seat of power. And so what we are seeing across not just the women of color, but women in general, they are deciding that they want and they are demanding a larger slice of the pie of power. And that is dangerous to grumpy old white men in power, and definitely to hard-headed Black men who won't support them and get out the way and ensure that our women get in office and take care of not just their agenda, but also the agenda of Black men. We've been overlooked for so long, and they are our champions. But what these women are saying now, it's not a conversation of may I. It's a get down or lay down. Either give us the power or we're going to take the power one way or the other.
All right, folks, tomorrow in Washington, D.C. is National Cannabis Festival. And, of course, it deals with this whole issue that we're seeing exploding across the country, this multi-billion-dollar industry where cannabis has been made legal in a variety of states. Now, the legal production and sale of cannabis is fertile ground for entrepreneurs, but the key is getting in the door. Now, there's now Malik, of course, he is the founder of the National Cannabis Festival and Policy Summit. Carolyn Phillips joins us right now. So Malik is actually, get that straight. Sorry, Carolyn Phillips is the founder of the National Cannabis Festival and Policy Summit. Malik actually has his own business as an entrepreneur. So, Carolyn, welcome to the show. Caroline.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much.
Okay, guys, I can barely hear Caroline.
Thank you so much for having
me. I can still barely hear her. So I'm going to throw the first question out. Hopefully I can hear you better. So, Caroline, why did you want to start this? Was it because not enough African Americans were involved in this space? Why'd you want to do this?
Well, it's definitely because of that and then more. I grew up in Washington, D.C., where the war on drugs really hit our lower income communities very hard. When I saw legalization come to D.C., I saw a lot of extremely expensive events come to our city, and I did not see any brown or Black faces in those audiences. And I wanted to change that. I wanted to create an event that was accessible and affordable and could give people access to information and education to arm them to be part of this industry.
So tomorrow is the festival. So what is the festival? What is happening there? What's happening at the Policy Summit?
So the Policy Summit was today at the Museum. It was a free event that was open to the public. It was really a convening of unlikely allies. We had people from both sides of the aisle talking about progress on cannabis legalization and social justice issues. Tomorrow is National Cannabis Festival. It's the 4th annual festival. We, of course, have a concert. It's headlined by Ludacris, Action Bronson, Biz Markie, and DC's Backyard Band. And then we have a lot more than that. We have 4 education pavilions where people can really learn about hemp and CBD. They can learn about business. They can learn about wellness. They can learn about policy and topics impacting cannabis culture all over the world. We also have an exhibitor village where people can see a lot of the businesses that are really innovating as far as products and what they're offering consumers in the cannabis space. But most importantly to me is our Veterans Pavilion and our Advocacy Village. In our Veterans Pavilion, members of the armed services, veterans, reservists will be able to gather and talk about how they use cannabis for wellness, possibly as an alternate to harmful opioids. And in our Advocacy Village, we'll have 32 of the nonprofit groups that have been leading the charge on cannabis legalization, exhibiting, talking to folks, educating them, and hopefully arming them to return to their communities and keep the fight alive.
So Malik, so many African Americans obviously have been impacted by the nation's drug wars, but when you look at the folks who are profiting right now, they don't look like us. You started your particular business. Is that what the genesis of it was? That like, look, if we were hurt by it before, we should be benefiting by it now.
Partly that, and the fact that 2 years ago, our office was ground zero for quite a few dispensary conversations in Pennsylvania. And I got a chance to see the numbers firsthand, and also where the slices were being given to and sent to. And so, look, at DeShuri, we were intentional. We said that we wanted our executives to be minority. We wanted our investment group and the investors that we took on to be minority. We wanted our employees to be minority. And all of those things have come to pass. It's not a Band-Aid to fix the gunshot wound that exists in this equity conversation, but rather to show that there is excellence in minority operations. We have 60,000 members of the Black farmers or the farmers group in cannabis, and Black farmers have been largely cut out of it. You're talking about 4.2% in minority participation when we talk about levels of ownership and executive actions inside of cannabis companies. And then we watch the banking bill, quite frankly, and we're hoping that we're able to move that forward along with state standards in PA and Maryland and Georgia. But making sure that African Americans and minority businesses do not get banged at the level of transaction as it relates to our businesses. If we're not able to bank, we're not able to really sustain ourselves, because most of these investment groups have enough in the tank to wait this thing out. Most minority groups are still waiting for the opportunity to hang in there. And so I'm excited about what's happening in DC for 420. And I think around the country, minority groups are coming together to support efforts like that in legislation.
Davon, there's been a lot of criticism there in your state of Maryland, the lack of African Americans with dispensaries. They felt that there should have been more protection by the state legislature, by the Black Caucus when those bills were passed. We're seeing this in other states as well. And so I think, look, at the end of the day, this is an opportunity. And I've had conversations with other individuals, Montel Williams, of course, one of our partners on the show. They had a whole crowdsourced funding deal to buy farms. This is an issue that, for African Americans, is an economic opportunity. And we should be having the conversation and be in the conversation and not be left behind when this thing is, I won't say it's right now, it's, for lack of a better phrase, fertile ground. But at the end of the day, this is not truly an industry that is already at capacity. We have an opportunity to actually be a part of this. Now we got to be engaged, Davon.
Absolutely. And you're right, about the state of Maryland, where, you had a lot of, white money really has driven the nature of licensing here in Maryland. White money's relationship, to the presiding officers and the Democratic Party leadership. And so, that's one of the things that's going to be a struggle we're looking at getting more Black folks access to those opportunities, is that, you know, they're competing against folks that just have more resources at their disposal. Now, one of the things that we're actually looking at here in the state of Maryland, my organization, Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, and our director of research, Lawrence Grand Prix, has been thinking about the idea of, you know, so there's one conversation to be had about business opportunities. And those business opportunities can include, you know, growing, but it can also include other auxiliary industries, you know, the paraphernalia and whatnot. But what we're looking at is, how do we take the enormous tax revenues that are going to be generated, and how do we make sure that those are actually directed to the communities most directly impacted by the war on drugs? Because even though, you know, it's important to look at ways to make sure that we're included on the business side, what we know is that there will be tax revenues to be generated. And in other states around the country, it was range between 50 million, you know, to 200 million, you know, depending on the state, depending on the tax structure. And so one of the things we're looking at is, how do we make sure that those resources don't just go to the general fund, but how do we make sure those resources are targeted at community opportunities, you know, opportunities for the community to be empowered, whether it's through community development opportunities, whether it's through investing in, you know, programs that can uplift people that are in those communities that were ravaged by the war on drugs. So I think that's also the other angle of this that's important to talk about, is how do we make sure those tax revenues are directed in a way where our community can be repaired from the harm that's been done.
Teresa, I want to get your thoughts, and I'm going to finish up with Caroline. Teresa, go ahead.
I think it's a great opportunity for economic development for African Americans. I think it's fine time that we have not only licenses, but the opportunity to be a part of a growing industry. So I applaud those efforts. I applaud the festival. I believe this is their second annual. But also the African American woman with the vision to do this, to know that it's more about networking and selling, but it's also about the policy that we can impact and change lives and communities every single day.
Caroline, we know that the reason this is being held up in New York State is because the Black Caucus is also demanding what is going to be the impact for African Americans. This is where Black state legislators across the country can use their power to ensure African Americans are not left out of this process. Again, we were hurt greatly as a result of these drug policies, and then we should not be left out of the opportunity to participate on the business side of the growing cannabis industry. Caroline, your final comment, your thoughts on that question?
Absolutely. We have states that are now using tax money from cannabis to pay bills, but we have people sitting in jail for paying their bills with money from cannabis. So that needs to be evened out. And I think before we rush for full federal legalization, we need to make sure there's a good foundation for equity. Because if you look at the .com boom and the whole Silicon Valley, you don't see people of color and you don't see women. And that's because we weren't at the table when those decisions were being made.
All right, where can people go to get more information on the National Cannabis Festival?
You can visit nationalcannabisfestival.com. Tickets are still on sale, and we'll be setting open the gates at high noon tomorrow.
All right then, Caroline Phillips, we appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right, folks, let's talk about this disturbing video out of New Haven, Connecticut. Roll the tape, please. In this video, what you will see is Stephanie Washington and her boyfriend, Paul Witherspoon III, both African Americans. They were in the red car. They came to a stop. We see one cop jump out of his car. In just 4 seconds, he fires at least 3 shots that we can see. Washington was hit in the face. Witherspoon, the driver, who was a suspect in an armed robbery, was taken into custody, but he was released a short time later without charges. Now, Washington was rushed to the hospital and is expected to survive. Another officer was shooting from the front of the vehicle, but this video does not show that. Cops initially said the driver exited the vehicle as soon as the officer stopped him. Well, that seems contradicted by the video. No shock. The officers involved are Devin Eaton of the Hamden Police Department and Terrence Pollock of the Yale Police Department. They both are on administrative leave pending an investigation. There have been a number of protests demanding the officers be fired and the body cam footage be released. And so we're going to be sure to keep you updated on that particular story. Now let's talk about this story we mentioned yesterday. White gentrifiers walking their dogs and picnicking on the campus of Howard University. Well, a local reporter on the Fox affiliate did an interview. And this white man, y'all, I can't even just roll the tape.
They're in part of D.C., so they have to work within D.C. If they don't want to be within D.C., then move the campus. I think we need to work together, and I don't think it should be a he or there or here. It's our community, and that's how it should be.
Okay, you can come back.
What? I'm sorry. Teresa, what the hell? Howard University should move?
No, Howard University should move, but this is the definition of white privilege and what's going on in D.C. as it relates to gentrification. So I hear them as they say our community, but our campus and our tuition is two very different scenarios. The Howard University leadership obviously needs to address this and make sure policies are put into place since there's so much gentrification that's going on in that area. But also, I'm actually glad that the local affiliate of Fox actually did do a piece on this, because it does show the disgrace and the disproportionate devisement of what's going on with some white Americans. And so I think, again, if, Howard University needs to make sure they put a stop to this, because they wouldn't do this to the Georgetown universities or the Lands and the American University, because it wouldn't even got to the local affiliate station if that had happened at their school. So there definitely has to be some policy in place to ensure the safety and security of our students.
Malik, Greg Carr, of course, chair of Howard University's Afro-American Studies Department, frequent panelist on this show. He tweeted this 2 hours ago. Dogs got nothing to do with it. They go where they're taken and where they're allowed. This is all about people. And in this country, no group respects black people until they're made to. Walk your dog on HU campus and find out how much we respect ourselves, Malik.
I love Greg. I'm so glad that he's a panelist on your show, and I think his tweet is spot on. Actually, if I were you, I'd love to see an interview with you, Greg, and this guy and see how that went for him. Look, this guy got 2.3 minutes of fame saying something really crazy out of his mouth. But he is a token and indicative of a greater issue, and that is, to Teresa's point, white privilege and its boldness, the fact that it is getting bolder every day. The gall to say that your dog walking has more priority than the education of any individual, let alone minorities, is absolutely insane. Let's not give him any more attention, but let's focus on what's happening with gentrification and how we can protect not just our universities, but the communities around it that serve, support it as well.
But Davon, we have to, focus on this, because what he said is what he articulated, what many people think, and it's that sort of attitude, oh, y'all should move, when Howard has been there when his ass would not move into a black neighborhood.
Yeah, and I would actually take it a step further. That statement is an extension or a representation of the larger colonial mentality that is a part of the collective American consciousness, where black people are literally just objects of other people's thought experiments, where black people simply serve as commodities to be trafficked for the interest of white institutions and white folks' pleasure. And so when you think about gentrification and the way that it's happening around the country, you have like the kind of hipster kind of profile, the kind of person that is proximate enough to black suffering, that there's a sense of enjoyment from being in close proximity to it, while at the same time, having just and really just destroying communities and neighborhoods from which black people live and struggle every day for the purpose of their own enjoyment. And that's the quintessential mechanism of colonialism. And as Dr. Carr said, the way to fight colonialism is that as black people, we need to stand up and challenge when white folks engage in activity, engage in discourse that justifies the dehumanization of our people.
All right, y'all, I got to end the show on this. Super white woman Laura Ingraham of Fox News was not happy that Chrissy Teigen was named to the Time Magazine 100 Most Influential list. This is what she said on her show.
Well, speaking of glamorous, model and wife of John Legend, Chrissy Teigen, was also chosen as one of the 100 most influential. Now, she's also known for her vicious attacks on President Trump, and she was chosen, according to the profile, because, quote, all her life, Chrissy Teigen has liked to eat. She's not shy about that or anything else, really. Well, that's nice and innovative, I guess, eating. But did most Americans like her take on female empowerment during last week's Democrat retreat?
I think it's possible to be really angry all the time.
If there was one word you would help particularly women use more frequently, what would that one word be?
F you.
I'm
sorry, speak of the last.
You're very...
Well, y'all, Laura was just taken aback that Chrissy would use such language. This is how Chrissy fired back on social media. I wonder if she is offended that her hero, Donald Trump, was quoted by the Mueller report as saying when he heard there was to be a special prosecutor, I'm fucked. Okay, when Trump put out tweet today with the word bullshit. So okay for Trump, white male Republican, not okay for Teigen, a black female Democrat. Keep in mind that Laura was not on the list. Teigen, feeling Laura's pain, tweeted, when Time comes out with their 100 most influential white supremacist list, I promise I won't question your worthiness. She also said that if there's a list of the 100 most influential white supremacists, Laura would be on the list. See, y'all gotta understand, Chrissy, y'all, she's of Thai and Norwegian descent, married to John Legend. Don't mess with her. I know her. She ain't regular. She'll cut you deep. So that's how it goes. All right, first of all, I want to thank Davon. I want to thank Malik as well as Teresa for joining me on today's show. Folks, I'm here in Las Vegas for the board meeting of the National Association of Black Journalists, where I'm Vice President Digital. And so we've been meeting here. Our campaign against CNN continues. We want to thank all of you who have supported us. Just an update, they, of course, Warner Media announced they're hiring an executive position that will be reporting directly to the head of Warner Media when it comes to diversity. Don't think for a second that didn't happen because we met with them. And also ABC News announced that they were hiring an executive to deal with the issue of diversity and inclusion. That announcement came after we also sat down with them. And so we're going to give you an update on how these companies are doing over the next several weeks. The pressure will stay on because we are all about representation of black people. Let me say it again, of black people in the executive ranks as well as on the air as well. Also, folks, on Sunday, I'll be celebrating, I'll be on the plane for half today, flying back to D.C. Married 18 years to Reverend Dr. Jackie Hood Martin. So that takes place on Sunday. Normally, I show you a photo, but I don't have my iPad hooked up to it, so y'all know how she looked. And so, again, I'll be celebrating our anniversary this weekend, so looking forward to that. If you want to support our Bring the Funk fan club, please do so by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Also, by the way, all of you who have given to us via Cash App, y'all got to send us your email so we can send you the promo code so you can have a discount on items that we have on our website. I'm going to let you know the first items that we're going to have on the website for sale next week that you'll be able to get a discount. Books, pocket squares, and some other items that we have. And so we look forward to that. So again, go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com if you want to join our Bring the Funk fan club. We end the show the same way always on Fridays with a list of all the folks who are or members of our fan club. If you're not on the list, send me an email and we'll make sure it gets taken care of. And so y'all have an absolute fabulous, fabulous weekend. I gotta go. Holla! You want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. See that name right there? Roland Martin Unfiltered. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so when we go live, you'll know it. Hey fam, want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? The blackest show on all of digital, cable, and broadcast. Check out our audio podcast. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. Press play. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com.